Kalam podcast is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy listening to Kalam, please subscribe to the show in whatever podcast application you're listening to right now, and please give us a rating. It helps other people find out about us. And if you'd like to support the show with a small donation, consider signing up to Kalam Podcast on Patreon for just $3 a month. In addition to supporting the show, you'll gain access to lots of great bonus content. Go to patreon.com and search for Kalam Podcast, or go straight to patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. That's patreon.com/Kalam Podcast. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the 25th installment of Kalam Digest. That's Kalam Podcast's weekly news summary. It's May 13th, 2025, and I'd like to welcome my esteemed colleagues to the show, Sam Khalsamra and Noura Ad-Din Faris. Welcome, guys.
Hello,
Thank you, Edgar.
welcome.
There's a snowstorm in Stockholm.
What's up in Rome?
Yeah, what's up in Rome?
It's 16 degrees and sun.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's wonderful here.
You're living the life, aren't you? I will be traveling to Italy, to Perugia, in April. Actually,
I will see you there. I'll be in Perugia as well.
Are you going to the journalism festival?
Yes, of course.
It's crazy that we haven't spoken about this.
Let's do that after this.
Yes. Okay. Today's episode.
I will be going to Jämtland to maximize the snow.
That's a whole
You
different
will get
episode,
lost.
explaining to our listeners what Jämtland is. Okay, so guys, we agreed today to discuss only two topics. We're going to begin with Syria and the development. Well, both kind of are about Syria, but at first we're going to be talking about the massacres that occurred last weekend of Alawite civilians on the northwestern coast of Syria. And then we're going to be talking about the dramatic developments vis-a-vis the Kurdish question in Syria and Turkey now that the PKK has disbanded, and we're going to be hearing a special dispatch from our colleague about that. But let's begin in Syria. Last weekend, there was a kind of pro-Assad, it seems, or at least anti-new government uprising, where armed militants attacked a Syrian government checkpoint. That checkpoint was manned by troops affiliated with the Syrian government, and the Syrian government now, as we've spoken about before, is dominated by HTS. That's the group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Committee to Liberate Syria, and that group is led by Ahmed al-Shara, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. He is now the interim president of Syria. So when we're talking about pro-government forces, that's who we're talking about. They were ambushed, and those people that were standing on the checkpoint that was ambushed were mainly young recruits that Ahmed al-Shara, the interim president, and his government had recently recruited. So they had gone through very basic training and were essentially slaughtered by this ambush by remnants of Assad's military, it seems. After this ambush, it seemed to a lot of Syrians that remnants of the Assad regime was trying to take back power, at least in northwestern Syria, where the regime had its stronghold and where most Alawites live, the minority that Bashar al-Assad and much of that government belonged to. So there was a mobilization of government forces. Ahmed al-Shara, the interim president, called on his militants and militants loyal to him to go to the northwestern coast to meet this uprising. But there was also a mobilization of civilians. A lot of imams in mosques started to call to arms, basically, of the general population. Yeah. And so a bunch of different kind of people descended upon the northwestern coast, thousands, I believe, of armed, mainly Sunni Muslims, a lot of them extremists belonging to different Islamist hardline groups. And they beat down the uprising, and in the process, they went house to house and committed, in my eyes, this is, the words of Edgar, pogroms against Alawite civilians.
Yeah.
According to certain sources, like the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, 1,000 civilians, mainly Alawites, were killed over the course of just 2 or 3 days. Other estimates put the figure slightly lower at about 700 to 800, but it seems that it's between 700 and 1,000 civilians killed in that short period of time. Since then, the interim president Ahmed Shara has denounced this violence and has called he has launched investigations to look into these killings and has promised to bring those responsible to justice. We did a whole episode about this with Orwa Ajoub, the Syrian analyst, but I think it's such a huge event and can be so meaningful for the future of Syria that we should speak about it here. Sam, what do you make of this?
I think it's important what you pointed out already, that there's a lot of different reports coming out. It's very hard to wrap your head around what's going on. It seems to have been almost no journalists or independent reporters at present in Latakia or the larger area. So it's really difficult to know exactly what's been going on. But I think it's clear that there has been widespread massacres of civilians, and that there has been some kind of pro-Assad or Ba'ath party uprising preceding that. That's what we know.
Sam, you just mentioned Latakia, and we said before the episode started that we were going to explain every single...
So Latakia being the main port city, or the central port city of Syria, and also the capital of this region, the coastal region of Syria, which is not it's not exclusively Alawi, but there's a big portion of the population is Alawi, and thus it's been considered a strong area for the previous regime. I think some different things is important to point out here. One is, this is horrible, unacceptable war crimes, let's call it that, so far as we know. But it's comes as a surprise because this is basically what we've been talking about, what most people expected to happen outright after the fall of Assad. It was expected to be, kind of revenge attacks. So we've been positively surprised that this hasn't happened yet. Now, of course, this is when kind of the test comes for the new regime. I guess, it was always perhaps prematurely or far too optimistic to think that there would never be any kind of ethnic violence as part of this transition period. But I think it's very, very significant is what happens now. How does the regime handle this? Do they try to make excuses or defend the people who carried out the pogroms or the attacks or the murders? Or are they serious about this fact-finding mission, this kind of committee that Shara has been talking about? I mean, his phrasing of it is very unambiguous. He's very clear, people are going to be brought to justice. The committee has all the full mandate to do whatever it needs, to carry out its work and find the truth. So, if that actually happens, it's hard to say that would be a positive thing, but then the end result might be a strengthening of the idea that the region is actually trying to protect all its citizens, regardless of sect, and that this is some kind of rogue, either from rogue groups within the armed forces or previous militiamen, or let's say armed civilians or irregular fighters carrying out these attacks. But it's also, I think it's interesting because it's the first time since the fall of Assad that any kind of serious military threat has been launched against the new regime. With the caveat that we know very little on what's happening on the ground, it seems that there was some serious attempts to actually attack important oil installations, military bases, etc. This is something very, very different from what's been going on, week in, week out since December, where, 3 or 4 armed Assad loyalists are hunted down or found by the regime and they are killed, or there's some kind of skirmish. This seems to have been clearly an organized attempt at an uprising. So also, I mean, it's really important for the future of Syria. Does it turn out that this is just the last attempt of the old regime to come back, or is it the beginning of some kind of more organized, deep-rooted movement that will actually be able to kind of threaten the regime, at least locally, over time? Because that's what we've seen so far, is like we have the Kurds and we have the rest of the country. The rest of the country has been basically calm.
Yeah.
Of course, apart from Israel, etc. But it's been very little of like organized or big scale internal strife.
So Nora, what's your take on I mean, being a minority today in Syria, despite the calls for an investigation, and like Sam mentioned, the president seems to be taking this seriously. Whether we can't, be inside his head, but what do you
No.
think that like minorities like Alawites in Syria today are feeling?
So to be honest, I think that in some ways this might not come as a surprise, because just as Sam mentioned, since the Assad regime fell, there has been a fear and a promise of some type of revenge against Alawites, because they have been supporting Assad and because they have been sitting on these really high positions within his government for a very long period of time. And so these people, that the attacks against the Alawites comes as a revenge for a 50-year-old conflict that has devastated the country and has devastated its citizens. But what we are also seeing now, especially during the weekend, we are seeing people that are living in the province of Latakia just fleeing. Like, they are leaving their homes and they don't bring any baggage, any luggage, anything.
Yeah.
They are fleeing up the mountains. They are fleeing across bodies of water without any belongings whatsoever. They're just fleeing for their lives. They're scattering all over. And this was kind of the promise from the new interim government, that this was not going to happen. They have been very clear since the beginning that there will be no revenge. There is no room for revenge. And that they have also, Al-Jawla al-Shara, he has promised, he has guaranteed the minorities of Syria, which are a lot, and the Alawites are just a part of it, even though they are the biggest minority group in Syria. So the promise has been that they are supposed to be safe. But during this time, I would say that there has been some type of hunt for Alawites that has been kind of going under the radar, because it hasn't been as big. So there has been reports of January and February of people just being killed and kidnapped simply because they are Alawites. And also in those instances, the government has said that they will do some type of investigation and they will find the people that have done this. But we don't know, like you're saying, if that is actually going to happen. And as just a person living in Syria right now, I think that this is somewhat expected, because there is such a big complot of people and groups living in Syria, and there was bound to be some type of conflict eventually, but that it was going to be this violent, I don't know if anybody was prepared for that.
I mean, I think what you're pointing out, Nora, is really important. There has been ongoing, as we've also mentioned in previous episodes, ongoing clashes, or what's at least written off as clashes or arrests, etc. But what's happening now is something different, because it's so big. I mean, this threatens kind of the whole fabric of Syrian society. And what I think we really need to keep in mind here is, like, the big question is also, to what extent is the central government in Damascus actually in control of the situation?
Yeah.
One side is very quick to point out that he's a great guy, he would never be behind this. The HTS are totally moderate and they're perfect. And the other side is saying, like, oh, this is what we expected all along.
Yeah.
This is why Assad should never have fallen, because now you know what's going to happen. Both sides are, I mean, I think, mistaken. But I think with one aspect that no one, or very few people, actually talk about is, like, to what extent are they able to determine the outcome of the situation? I mean, without speculating, without saying anything about his personal opinions, I would be very surprised if Ashara would be in any way behind this or supporting this, because it's such a PR catastrophe for his country
Yeah.
or his regime at the time when, they need all the support and all the kind of openings to the West that they can get. So, I mean, just for that simple reason, I mean, it's very improbable that he would be like masterminding or wanting this to happen. But on the other hand, this is to the extent that there is even an army, it's just it's an agglomeration of different militia forces, and of course, those are not easy to control in any situation. But also, to what extent is there even a central command? We know that they're trying to build that, but are we sure that there is that whatever is going on in Latakia is actually even something that the central government in Damascus can determine?
Yeah.
And we're also coming from a situation where I mean, under Assad, even even the parts which nominally he controlled, it was an anarchic kind of free for all, society in breakdown. So
I think it does seem like the government did send out people to try to stop violent militants from entering coastal cities in and around Latakia in order to commit these massacres, but they weren't able to. Now, the government obviously prioritized beating down the pro-Assad uprising over protecting civilians. That is something we kind of have to deduce, right? If it managed to beat back an armed uprising, but didn't manage to prevent other militant armed groups from entering coastal cities and killing people, it does seem that there was a kind of prioritization there. And from Ahmed al-Shara, the interim president's statements on this subject, most of his statements begin with condemning the uprising and calling for the remnants of the Assad regime to lay down their weapons and calling it a sin, etc. And then he goes on to say, and the killings of civilians were bad.
yeah.
So, I don't think that he thinks this is good, but I don't think it's of highest priority for him, because I do think that he can sort of understand it in terms of revenge. I think that he also is a person that was that has experienced this kind of like Assad style oppression, and I think that he, obviously, being a former jihadi, I don't know if you can ever be not a jihadi if you once were, but
There's no going back.
I mean, it's like,
Once
look,
you go jihadi, you never go back.
if you once were part of Daesh, I don't know, you know what I mean? It's like if someone comes and
No,
tells
I agree with. I mean, I agree with you. I'm
I
not
was
saying
like-
that's what I was trying to say. Is like I don't. I'm not going to argue that inside his personal kind of ethical part of his brain. I mean, I don't know how whatever way he views it, but I'm saying like it's something that is so obviously detrimental to his government standing and his regime's, international standing, that there's
Yeah.
no way that he would be planning this or wanting for this to happen.
Yeah,
And I
but
think you're totally right in the fact, and I think there's something interesting with that is it seems clear from a lot of different sources that the threat to the regime was actually both, I mean, actually and perceived as being serious. I mean, something very, very different from what's been going on and off for the last months. This was seen as some actual attempt to topple or to kind of destabilize the new regime totally or substantially. I mean, that's also something interesting here. I mean, are we going to see a more long-term kind of factional fight? Because I mean, I don't think that he would, or I don't think the regime would overreact or would let this kind of get out of hand in this way if they didn't perceive the original kind of uprising as very serious or a very serious threat that, as you said, has to be prioritized even over protecting civilians.
yeah,
But I mean, also talking about being in control, I think it's, I mean, it's one thing is being in control in the sense that you can send out people to fight, I think they're in control in that sense. They have fighting men that they are able to kind of, for example, in this situation, dispatch to an area to kind of, shoot people. But are they in control in the sense that they control kind of the government institutions, the local kind of networks, the administration of an area, to the extent that they actually can do that in any kind of coordinated or planned way? And I think perhaps what we're seeing here is that they're not. They're able to kind of strike back, send out people to shoot whoever, but they're not able to, in any kind of more structured way, have stability and control over every area of the country, and that is not unexpected, but
Yeah.
worrisome, of course.
Of course, I mean, it's clear that Ahmed al-Shara / Jolani does not necessarily have a monopoly on violence in Syria today,
Yeah.
which the state would need moving forward.
Yeah.
But I mean,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
So if we just one question, which is like a slight detour off of this, does anybody know why he changed his name?
Oh yeah, sure. Abu Muhammad Jawlani is a nom de guerre, which is taken by jihadists. So the leader of Daesh, of ISIS, Abu
al-Baghdadi,
Bakr al-Baghdadi, was not named Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. That's a name he took. His real name was something else. Jihadis take a name, Abu Muhammad, the name sort of. So his one of his sons' name is Muhammad, and then he takes his last name would be the city or the province where he comes from.
Yeah.
So Jawlani
So this
comes
guy
from
from
Golan Heights, from Jawlan.
Golan Heights. Yeah.
And Abu Bakr
So
al-Baghdadi.
this is-
Now he's
So-
now he's like demobilizing himself as a jihadi
Okay,
fighter.
so now he's
Reclaiming
actually using his real name.
civilian
Okay,
name.
thank you.
Yeah, this is
He
his actual
took off the turban.
He's like Lenin or Trotsky or whatever. It's like an old tradition.
Well, maybe I don't know. Like it's sure it is an old tradition, but this is specifically in the jihadi tradition of taking that.
Yeah, but I mean, Lenin named himself after the river Lena. I mean, Lenin is just a kind of a Jolani, but for a Russian guy. So
yeah,
it's
but
very
Lenin he didn't. Yeah, sure.
But he wasn't a Muslim. No, I mean, saying you have
Different when Muslims do it.
conspiratorial organizations. You often have these kind of traditions of how you name yourself, even if you're not like kind of on the ground or whatever. You kind of tend to.
So that's
Tony
that on
Cliff.
that. Anyway, should we leave this subject for now and speak a little
I
bit
mean, I think
about?
we should, because I think we have to follow these developments, and I think we have to be, very, very frank about this. It's deeply worrisome and horrific development, but we also don't really know yet kind of the full impact of this on the development of Syria. Will they be able to kind of regain control? Will they be able to kind of carry out some kind of legal process, basically, to arrest or bring people to justice? If they do that, that this might just be a bump in the road. But if this is kind of the new standard way of dealing with unruly parts of the country, we're just heading back to Assad times. So
Yeah.
It's
So,
far too soon to say, I would say.
Moving on to our second subject today, dramatic
What's
developments.
happening with the Kurds?
Well, what's up with the
What's
Kurds?
up with the Kurds?
What's up with the Kurds?
Basically,
We have to make a little jingle like do.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, if let's workshop that for sure. So the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, which is deemed a terrorist organization by many in the West, a kind of socialist movement, according to others, they have. Or the leader of it, Abdullah Öcalan, who's sitting in a Turkish prison since many decades, called for its disillusionment, a huge piece of news that caught many by surprise. This has been followed by a historic agreement between Ahmed al-Shara, the interim president of Syria, and his Kurdish counterpart in northeastern Syria. Mazlumi is his name. I forget his first name. He's the leader of the Kurdish forces in northeastern Syria. Noura,
The SDF, as previously mentioned many times over on this podcast.
the Syrian Democratic
Syrian
Forces,
Defense Forces. Syrian Democratic Forces.
who were instrumental in defeating Daesh and who have been like one of the major players in the Syrian conflict, essentially. And they today control an autonomous region in northeastern Syria, Qamishli being one of the major cities over there, bordering Turkey and Iraq, I believe.
Yes.
Now there's a deal for the first time in the history of Syria between these two groups, the Syrian sort of central government and the Kurds. Noura, what's going on?
Well, to be honest, we had to reach out for help to find out what is going on.
Yeah.
And That's exactly what we did when the first news about this to put down arms came as news. We reached out to Miran Kake, a Swedish immigration attorney, and he has worked closely with the Kurdish community and is himself of Kurdish descent. We are going to play a pretty long
Somewhat short.
analysis, somewhat short, analysis of his of what this means and what we can expect going forwards. But basically, what he is saying is that the PKK is used to kind of giving birth to itself in new and different ways, and is used to taking on some type of shape shift, which seems to be kind of what is happening now as well. This is Miran Kake's analysis.
I think from an outside perspective, the statement might seem a bit shocking because the PKK as a political party has existed for almost 50 years and has been waging an armed struggle for 41 years. But when we look at the history of the PKK since its inception, we can see that the PKK has a very rich history of restructuring, of ideological shifts, but also dissolution. This is not the first time Öcalan has called on the PKK to lay down its arms, and should the PKK choose to dissolve, it will not be the first time they dissolve either. They did so in 2002 when the PKK was dissolved and Kadek was established. So, in the context of the evolution of the PKK as a political party and as a social movement, this statement isn't as exceptional as it might seem initially. I think we have to understand the call from Öcalan as an acknowledgement that the PKK has to transform and restructure in accordance with the social and political reality of current Turkey, which is something that the PKK has been doing since always and is the reason why they have been able to survive and even grow stronger during these 50 years. I also think the timing of the call from Abdullah Öcalan is very interesting. It gives us some clues as to the reasons behind it. But first of all, I think it's important to be clear on this point. I do not believe that it is the PKK or Abdullah Öcalan who have been forced to surrender or accept a deal offered by the Turkish state. It is the Turkish state who are feeling fundamentally threatened by the recent developments in the Middle East, in Syria specifically, and feel that it is necessary to achieve peace with the PKK in order to not lose its position in the hegemonic war. If we look at the policies of the Turkish state with regards to the Kurdish question in general and in Syria in particular, it is clear that the single biggest interest of Turkey has always been to counter Kurdish autonomy in the Middle East and in northern East Syria, and the reason being the alleged ties between the autonomous administration and the PKK. It is very clear that Turkey views an autonomous Kurdish region in northern East Syria as an existential threat to the Turkish nation-state in its current form, but also to its imperialist ambitions and policies in Syria and Iraq. And even though HDS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has close ties and cooperate with Turkey, the matter of the fact is that Turkey has never been in a tighter spot than it is right now in Syria. With Assad gone and Russia and Iran having become much less relevant, it has been increasingly difficult for Turkey to maintain or strengthen its position in Syria. Less players in Syria means less leverage for Turkey, who used to be in a very comfortable position and could, for example, leverage Russia against the US in order to counter Kurdish autonomy and invade parts of northern Syria. With these players gone, the position of the US, who are still supporting the SDF, has grown stronger. But the biggest threat in the eyes of the Turkish state comes from Israel, whose influence in Syria has increased dramatically since the fall of Assad. Israel is becoming increasingly aggressive in Syria, and they are occupying more parts of southern Syria. So, the Turkish state is feeling very anxious, and it is this anxiety that forces them to reach out to Öcalan. If Turkey can get the PKK to lay down its arms in exchange for increased rights for Kurds in Turkey, or maybe even a potential recognition of some kind of semi-autonomous administration in northern Syria, it could effectively reduce much of Israel's influence and strength and power in the region, while also eliminating the perceived threat from the PKK. And it is in this context that Öcalan and the PKK, who recognize that they are in a position of strength. So now we have this call from Öcalan, which is not the end of the PKK, but the beginning of a long process of negotiations and future concessions on both sides. Although we need to be cautious, I think the recent developments this week, in which the SDF and Jolani agreed to a preliminary framework agreement, is a positive sign, which would not have been possible without a green light from Turkey, which in turn would not have happened without the peace call from Öcalan and the ceasefire declaration from the PKK. This is all very connected, as we can see also from the recent statement from Erdogan supporting the deal between HTS and SDF. But as I said, it will be a long process, it will be a fragile process, and because of its great potentiality for peace in the Middle East, the process also carries the potentiality for incredible war and devastation if it fails.
So that was Miran Kake, who is a migration attorney in Sweden and who also is involved in the Kurdish diaspora and a pro-Kurdish organizer in Sweden. So this is obviously the opinions of Miran Kake. I thought it was a quite interesting analysis, but I think we should break it down a little bit. I mean, Miran Kake is clearly very pro-PKK. And from his position, he's seeing a weak Turkey. In my view, I mean, the entire development in Syria was to Turkey's benefit, right? I think that most analysts came out after the Assad government fell and Jolani, now Ahmed Shara, took over power, that they were like, okay, Turkey just basically entered Damascus. This was a big win for Turkey. So I think that maybe we should nuance this this analysis just slightly. Sam, what's your take?
I mean, I agree with you. I think he's right in the sense that we shouldn't see this as kind of, it's not the PKK giving up or just abandoning their struggle because they're defeated or anything. It's part of a give and take here. But I would say, like as you just mentioned, the fall of Assad is a huge success for Turkey, of course. And let's not forget that the SDF forces in northeastern Syria, even though everyone, including themselves and, everyone except for Turkey basically denies this or doesn't want to speak about it. I mean, it's clearly closely allied to the PKK leadership and the PKK kind of broader structure of power. So they were closely allied with Assad for, at least from 2014, 2015, they had kind of just a division of power where they were kept in, they were allowed to just keep their bases and keep total control over their part of Syria. And the fact that Shara and the HTS took power in Damascus means that is not going to be, it's not going to hold forever. They're not going to accept just kind of leaving that part of the country to be independent, which is what Assad basically did. So that means that the PKK has a much stronger incentive today to reach an agreement. But I would also perhaps agree with him saying that, I mean, the point that this is not only Turkey acting kind of, it's not like they just won and PKK were defeated. I would say they're also kind of it would make sense for Turkey to rethink their kind of the structure of the alliances in this area. And if they could reach an agreement where they would diffuse or disarm or dearm the Kurdish issue, they would be so much more strongly positioned to work with their neighbors going forward. They would be able to perhaps like have Syria as a strong ally, which they wouldn't be, quote unquote, forced to invade every now and then. They might actually kind of be moving into stronger relationship with Iraq, etc. And from that viewpoint, I would say like it also makes sense for Turkey to kind of rethink their relationship to this whole question, the Kurdish question, let's say. And last but not least, the major losers in this thing again is Iran. Seems to be just left with no kind of assets on the ground, basically, as far as I can tell. So yeah, I mean, let's not say that it's PKK were winning, but not either Turkey winning. I would say like it seems both have an interest in this agreement, and if it's actually a ceasefire happens, this would be, I mean, it would be even more historical for the Middle East than the fall of Assad.
Nora, do you have questions about what was said?
Well, no, I don't have questions. I would actually just like to discuss while we are speaking about this, that whenever we are talking about that region, like northeast Syria and the part that is controlled by the Kurds, it is impossible not to kind of soar into the topic of the ISIS camps, especially if we're talking about Al-Kamishli, as you mentioned, where it has been, well, partly there has been since Trump decided to withdraw funding, this is going to mean that Syria or the Kurds potentially or together will have to up their work with these camps and to guard them because they are losing out on money. At the same time as already in 2019, I think the SDF said that they cannot really prioritize guarding these camps, and that's also why the camps have become so incredibly violent. There has been like surges of killings and of all kinds of horrific things. So whenever we talk about the Kurds, I always want to kind of, what do you guys think will happen with the ISIS camps?
Yeah, I mean, I think we mentioned this first, even when we started out talking about Syria, the change of regime in Syria, we were discussing this, how we were, we're from the generation where you were upset about Guantanamo. This is like Guantanamo times 200 or something, just forgotten by everyone. And I mean, no love lost for Daesh fighters per se, but none of them have gotten even a trial. It's like it's just people, tens of thousands of people sitting in camps in the middle of the desert, being treated like animals, basically. And of course, if you let those people loose again, or if they manage to break free through some kind of, it will be catastrophic, because what reason would they have to do anything but kind of go back to Daesh kind of Islamism. But I mean, so as you said, I mean, we also have, this is a huge bargaining chip for everyone involved. I mean, in a weird way, it's also like, Trump just actually cut funding and like leave them there. I mean, that is not viable policy.
No, it's really not.
But I mean, I think also we have to talk about the fact that surely this deal struck between Damascus and the Kurds is a deal between Turkey and the US as well. This has not happened, without the US actually being involved on the Kurdish side to both force them to say yes, because, they are totally dependent on US arms and US funding, but also to some extent they have been probably managed to work out some deals. So I would just at least hope that somewhere in the fine print there is some kind of agreement on what to do with this, which hopefully also involves them actually getting a trial at some point and being sentenced to something for something, not just left there to rot.
Yeah. Exactly. Edgar, what are your thoughts about all of this?
Well, I think the jails or the camps are a huge question, especially the children of many ISIS fighters who are just also in these camps living in horrible conditions. I think that these are the exact kind of conditions that create even worse extremism. But beyond that, I think the Kurdish question is, it's interesting that it's developing into these negotiated settlements, and that on the one hand the region is kind of like in flames, and on the other hand you have historic adversaries sitting down signing pieces of paper, reaching agreements.
It's insane.
It's like on literally on the west coast of the country of Syria, there are pogroms against minorities, and on just like right across the country on the eastern part, there are modern political agreements being made. It just goes to show that this is such an alive situation, and that like death and destruction is not a constant and is not like something that is inevitable. Neither is negotiated settlements. So
of course not.
I think
but I mean, I think you're totally right. I mean, just that I mean, especially with all the horrible news coming in from Latakia, I was seeing that image of the what's his name, Mazlumi, shaking hands with the shadow. I usually don't pay a lot of attention to, politicians shaking hands and looking nice on TV, but I was like, I was sincerely, I mean, I was really, really happy to see that image. I was like, this is impressive. They sit
Yeah.
down together and they hammer out some kind of agreement, and they seem to be saying like,
Yeah.
we will not have to murder each other. We will be able to do this. And I was like, if they manage to do this, this is a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Deserved.
yeah, okay. Nobel Peace Prize to former Daesh
Shut up.
guy.
Mazlumi. No, let's not go there yet. But I'm saying, like, I mean, this is that kind of level of a deal, and that
Yeah.
it's as hard to think, it's something you would never imagine, like just months ago. It's in that way it's similar to Rabin and
Arafat.
Arafat, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, let's leave it at that. We'll see who wins the Nobel Peace Prize, if it's going to be Jolani or Trump.
I would place my money somewhere else.
Yeah, Jolani and Trump. That's my.
Yeah, the two of them.
Oh, God.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Kalam Digest. Today is the 13th of March. You're going to be hearing it on the 14th, probably. Have a great day, guys.
Have a great day,
You too.
Edgar. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.